The champagne flute trembled in my hand as I watched my sister Vivian glide across the marble floor of the Blackstone estate, her emerald dress catching the light from the crystal chandeliers above. She moved with the practiced grace of someone who had spent years perfecting the art of deception. Her smile radiant and her laugh melodic as she charmed another circle of Manhattan's elite. To everyone else, she was the perfect picture of sophistication. The successful gallery owner, the devoted daughter, the loving sister who had flown in from Paris just to celebrate my engagement to Marcus Blackstone. But I knew better. I had always known better. The weight of the 3-carat diamond on my finger felt suddenly heavy, almost accusatory, as I watched Vivian lean in close to whisper something in Marcus's ear. His expression shifted, just slightly, but enough for me to catch the flicker of uncertainty that crossed his features. My stomach dropped like a stone thrown into still water, sending ripples of dread through my entire body. Whatever she had just told him, it wasn't congratulations on finding happiness. It wasn't sisterly advice about marriage. It was poison, carefully measured and delivered with surgical precision. "Elena, darling, you look absolutely radiant tonight." The voice belonged to Constance Whitmore, one of New York's most prominent socialites and a longtime family friend of the Blackstones. Her compliment was genuine, but I could barely register her words through the fog of anxiety that had settled over me like a suffocating blanket. "Thank you, Mrs. Whitmore," I managed, forcing my lips into what I hoped resembled a smile. "The party is beautiful, isn't it?" The words felt foreign in my mouth, as if I were speaking a language I had only recently learned. Everything about tonight felt surreal, like I was watching my life unfold from somewhere high above, unable to influence the events playing out below. The engagement party had been Vivian's idea, of course. "You simply must have it at the estate," she had insisted during our last phone call, her voice dripping with what our mother had always called her continental charm, that peculiar blend of sophistication and manipulation she had perfected during her years in Europe. "Marcus's family has such exquisite taste, and the gardens will be absolutely divine in September. Besides, it will give me a chance to properly meet the man who's stolen my little sister's heart." Little sister. The phrase had always made my skin crawl, despite, or perhaps because of, the fact that Vivian was only 18 months older than I was. She wielded those 18 months like a weapon, using them to justify every condescending comment, every subtle dig, every moment when she positioned herself as the wise elder sister guiding her naive younger sibling through life's complexities. But what bothered me most wasn't the condescension. It was the lie buried beneath it. Vivian had never been the protective older sister she pretended to be. She had been my competition from the moment I drew my first breath, and she had never forgiven me for existing in a world she believed belonged exclusively to her. The proof was written in the history of our childhood like invisible ink, only becoming visible when held up to the harsh light of hindsight. The time she accidentally spilled red wine on my white dress minutes before my high school graduation ceremony. The way my college boyfriend James suddenly became distant after Vivian's surprise visit during my sophomore year, eventually confessing that my concerned sister had warned him I wasn't ready for a serious relationship. The mysterious last-minute cancellation of my job interview at her friend's art gallery in Paris, an opportunity that would have changed the entire trajectory of my career. Each incident had been explained away with tears and apologies, with promises that she had only been trying to protect me, that she had never meant for things to turn out the way they did. And for years I had believed her. I had wanted to believe her, because the alternative, accepting that my own sister actively worked to undermine my happiness, was too painful to contemplate. Now, watching her whisper secrets into my fiancé's ear while wearing that same innocent expression she had perfected over the years, I felt something inside me finally crystallize into sharp, unforgiving clarity. This wasn't sisterly concern. This wasn't protection. This was sabotage, pure and simple, and I was done pretending otherwise. Marcus stepped away from Vivian, his eyes searching the crowd until they found mine. The look on his face made my blood run cold. It wasn't anger, exactly, or even disappointment. It was something worse. A careful, measured neutrality that suggested he was trying very hard not to let his true feelings show. When someone you love looks at you like you're a stranger, like they're seeing you for the first time and aren't entirely pleased with what they've discovered, it's a special kind of heartbreak. He began walking toward me, and I found myself holding my breath, counting his steps like a condemned woman counting down to her execution. 1, 2, 3. With each footfall on the marble floor, my future seemed to crumble a little more. By the time he reached me, I felt as though I were standing in the ruins of everything I had dared to hope for. "Elena," he said, his voice carefully modulated to avoid attracting attention from the other guests, "could I speak with you privately for a moment?" The words were polite, proper, exactly what you would expect from someone raised in the rarefied atmosphere of old money and careful manners. But underneath the politeness was something else, something that made my chest tighten with panic. This was the voice Marcus used in business meetings when he was about to deliver bad news to an investor. This was the voice of someone who had already made a decision and was simply going through the motions of explanation. "I see," I heard myself say, though my voice sounded strange and distant, as if it were coming from someone else entirely. I set my champagne glass down on a nearby table, with hands that were steadier than they had any right to be, and followed him through the maze of guests toward the French doors that led to the garden. As we walked, I caught glimpses of the other partygoers, Marcus's business associates, family friends, the carefully curated collection of Manhattan society that had gathered to celebrate our union. They were all beautiful, successful people, living beautiful, successful lives, and none of them had the slightest idea that they were witnessing the slow-motion destruction of everything I had ever wanted. The September air was crisp against my skin as we stepped onto the terrace, carrying the promise of autumn and the faint scent of roses from the garden below. Under different circumstances, it would have been romantic, the kind of perfect evening that belonged in fairy tales and movie scenes. Instead, it felt like a stage set for heartbreak, beautiful and cold and utterly indifferent to human suffering. He turned to face me, and I saw my future written in the careful way he held his shoulders, the precise distance he maintained between us. This was not the posture of a man preparing to discuss a minor misunderstanding. This was the body language of someone who had already begun the process of letting go. "Vivian told me something tonight, something about your past that she thought I should know before we—" He paused, the unfinished sentence hanging between us like a blade. "Before we go any further with our plans." The careful euphemism hit me like a physical blow. Our plans, not our wedding, not our marriage, not our life together, just plans, as if our entire future could be reduced to a series of appointments that might need to be canceled. I wanted to ask him what she had said, wanted to demand the specifics of whatever lies she had fed him, but something in his expression stopped me. There was a finality to it that suggested questions would only delay the inevitable. Whatever story Vivian had told him, he had already decided to believe it. "I see," I said, surprised by how calm I sounded. The pause stretched between us like a chasm, filled with the distant sounds of laughter and conversation from the party we had left behind. In that silence, I found myself thinking about all the moments that had led us to this terrace, this conversation, this ending that felt both sudden and inevitable. The night we met, at a charity auction, when Marcus had bid on a painting I had been admiring, he insisted I keep it because it looked lonely without you. The morning he had proposed, kneeling in the sand on a beach in the Hamptons while the sunrise painted the sky in shades of gold and pink. The thousand small intimacies that had built our relationship, moment by moment, into something I had foolishly believed was unshakable. All of it was destroyed by whatever poison Vivian had dripped into his ear, as efficiently as acid eating through steel. As Marcus began to speak, his words careful and clinical, I made a decision that would change everything. I would not stand here and listen to my sister's lies repeated back to me like gospel truth. I would not nod and accept blame for sins I had never committed, mistakes I had never made. And most importantly, I would not let Vivian destroy my life while she walked away clean, her own secrets safely buried. Because I knew things about my perfect sister that would make even her billionaire future father-in-law think twice about welcoming her into his family. Things that would shatter her carefully constructed image like glass hitting concrete. Things that would finally make her pay for every moment of happiness she had stolen from me over the years. The game was about to change, and for once, I was going to be the one holding all the cards. The words Marcus spoke on that terrace carved themselves into my memory with surgical precision, each syllable a small death. Vivian told me about the affair you had with Professor Hartwell during graduate school. He said, his voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone trying to remain objective while his world crumbled around him. She said she kept your secret all these years to protect you, but she couldn't stand by and watch me enter a marriage built on lies. The accusation hit me like ice water, shocking in its audacity and devastating in its implications. Professor Hartwell, distinguished, married, 25 years my senior, had been my thesis advisor during my master's program in art history at Columbia. He had been brilliant, demanding, and utterly professional in every interaction we'd ever had. The idea that I had engaged in an affair with him was so absurd it would have been laughable under different circumstances. But these weren't different circumstances. This was my engagement party, and the man I loved was looking at me with the careful distance of someone who had already begun the process of disentangling his life from mine. "Marcus, that's completely untrue," I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest. "Professor Hartwell was my advisor, nothing more. I don't understand why Vivian would—" He interrupted, and the gentleness in his voice somehow made everything worse. It was the tone you used with someone you pitied, someone whose delusions you were trying to shatter as kindly as possible. She showed me the emails, the hotel receipts from the conference in Boston, the photographs. Photographs. The word echoed in my mind as I tried to process what Vivian could possibly have manufactured to support her lies. Then, with horrible clarity, I remembered the art history conference in Boston 3 years ago. Professor Hartwell was the keynote speaker, and several of his graduate students, myself included, had attended. We had all stayed at the same hotel, attended the same sessions, shared meals and academic discussions. Somewhere in those innocent professional interactions, Vivian had found the raw materials to construct a fiction that would destroy my life. She had taken legitimate emails about research, receipts from a conference I had every right to attend, and photographs from academic events, then woven them into a narrative of betrayal and deception. It was brilliant in its simplicity and devastating in its effectiveness. How could I possibly defend myself against evidence that wasn't technically false, just maliciously recontextualized? How could I explain that what looked like proof of an affair was actually proof of nothing more than professional dedication? "I need some time to think," Marcus said, and those 6 words sealed my fate. In the language of relationships, needing time to think was diplomatic speak for the end. It was the gentle precursor to the difficult conversation, the cushion placed beneath the blow that was inevitably coming. I wanted to fight. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to grab his hands, to make him look into my eyes and see the truth there. I wanted to demand that we call Professor Hartwell right now, to insist that we examine these so-called photographs together, to tear apart Vivian's story piece by fabricated piece until the truth emerged from the wreckage. But I knew it wouldn't matter. The seed of doubt had been planted, and like all poisonous seeds, it would grow in the darkness of uncertainty until it choked out everything else. Even if I could prove my innocence, and the rational part of my mind knew that I could, eventually, the damage was already done. Marcus would always wonder if there was some truth to Vivian's story. He would analyze every interaction I'd ever had with male colleagues, every late night at the office, every conference or business dinner. The trust that formed the foundation of our relationship had been shattered, and trust, once broken, never quite fit back together the same way. As I walked back into the party alone, leaving Marcus on the terrace to contemplate the ruins of our future, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. The Elena who had walked out of that room 20 minutes ago had been someone who believed in fairness, who trusted that truth would always triumph over lies, who maintained faith that good intentions and honest communication could solve any problem. The Elena walking back in was someone harder, colder, infinitely more dangerous. She understood with crystalline clarity that some battles couldn't be won with honesty and good intentions. Some enemies required a different kind of warfare altogether. I found myself scanning the crowd for Vivian, my eyes cutting through the beautiful, glittering facade of Manhattan society to locate my target. She was standing near the grand piano, holding court with a small group of admirers, her laughter bright and musical as she regaled them with some charming anecdote about her life in Paris. She looked radiant, triumphant, like a woman who had just accomplished something wonderful and was basking in the afterglow of success. The sight of her happiness, while my world crumbled around me, ignited something in my chest that felt like molten metal. For 28 years, I had been the good daughter, the understanding sister, the one who absorbed Vivian's cruelty and somehow transformed it into forgiveness. I had made excuses for her behavior, rationalized her actions, found ways to blame myself for the way she hurt me. No more. As I watched her charm another victim into her web, memories flooded back with startling clarity. Not the soft, focused reminiscences of childhood that I had carefully cultivated over the years, but the sharp, unforgiving truth of what growing up with Vivian had actually been like. I remembered being 7 years old, showing our parents a drawing I had made at school, a simple crayon sketch of our family standing in front of our house. I had been so proud of it, had spent careful attention on the details, the blue shutters on the windows, the red roses in our mother's garden, the way I had tried to capture the exact shade of our father's hair. But when Vivian saw it, her face twisted with something ugly and primal. Elena copied that from a book, she had announced with a casual cruelty that children wield so effortlessly. I saw her looking at it yesterday. She's not creative enough to make something like that on her own. Our parents had laughed it off, chalking it up to sibling rivalry, but the damage had been done. I had thrown the drawing away that night, had never shown them another piece of my artwork, had internalized the message that my creativity was worthless, stolen, somehow fraudulent. That pattern had repeated itself throughout our childhood and adolescence, with Vivian finding increasingly sophisticated ways to undermine my confidence and achievements. When I made the honor roll, she would casually mention to our parents how she had helped me study, taking credit for my success while making it seem like generosity. When I was accepted to Columbia, she made sure to remind everyone that it was her recommendation letter from her professor friend that had probably made the difference. When I landed my first job at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, she sent flowers with a card that read, "So proud of you for landing such a perfect entry-level position." Each comment was carefully calibrated to sound supportive while carrying a poisonous subtext. Each gesture appeared generous while actually diminishing my accomplishments. It was psychological warfare disguised as sisterly love, and it had taken me decades to recognize it for what it truly was. But perhaps the most devastating memory was from my college years, during what should have been one of the happiest periods of my life. I had been dating David Morrison, a pre-med student who was everything I had ever dreamed of in a partner. Kind, intelligent, ambitious, and absolutely devoted to me. We had been together for almost 2 years, had started talking about marriage, about the life we would build together after graduation.
Then Vivian had come to visit during my junior year, ostensibly to see how I was doing and to meet the boy who had stolen her little sister's heart. She had been charming, effusive in her praise of David, had insisted on taking us both out to dinner at the most expensive restaurant in town. "I want to get to know the man who makes my sister so happy," she had said, linking her arm through his with easy intimacy. Within a week of her visit, David had become distant. Our long conversations dwindled to polite small talk. Our passionate relationship cooled to something formal and uncomfortable. When I finally confronted him about the change, he had looked at me with something that might have been pity. "Your sister told me some things," he had said, his voice gentle but final, "about your family, about some problems you've been having. She's worried about you, Elena. She thinks you might not be ready for the kind of commitment we've been talking about." I had begged him to tell me what she had said, had pleaded with him to give me a chance to explain, but he had already made up his mind. Whatever story Vivian had told him, whatever carefully constructed fiction she had woven about my mental state or emotional stability, it had been convincing enough to end our relationship. Later, much later, I would learn through mutual friends that Vivian had told David I had been hospitalized for a suicide attempt during high school, a complete fabrication, but one that explained my supposed fragility and inability to handle stress. She had painted herself as the concerned sister trying to protect both me and him from a relationship that was destined to cause pain. It was masterful manipulation, really. By positioning herself as my protector, she had made David feel like ending our relationship was an act of kindness rather than cruelty. She had taken what should have been his decision and made it feel like the only moral choice he could make. The pattern was always the same. Vivian would identify something or someone that made me happy, then systematically destroy it while making herself look like the hero of the story. She was a virtuoso of emotional manipulation, capable of turning any situation to her advantage while maintaining the facade of sisterly devotion. Standing in the Blackstone estate, watching her work her magic on yet another unsuspecting audience, I finally understood the full scope of what I was dealing with. This wasn't sibling rivalry or childhood jealousy that she would eventually outgrow. This was pathological behavior from someone who genuinely believed that my happiness was somehow an insult to her existence, that my success diminished her own worth, that the world was only big enough for one of us to truly thrive. For 28 years, she had been waging a war against me that I hadn't even realized was happening. While I had been trying to build a life, a career, relationships, she had been quietly dismantling everything I touched with the patience and precision of a master craftsman. But now I knew. Now I could see the pattern, understand the tactics, predict the next move. And most importantly, I could finally fight back.
The thought of revenge should have felt foreign to me, should have sat uneasily with the person I had always believed myself to be. Instead, it felt like coming home, like finally stepping into a version of myself I had been denied for far too long. The good girl Elena, the one who turned the other cheek and found ways to excuse Vivian's cruelty, had been a performance. This new Elena, the one who understood that sometimes the only way to stop a predator was to become something equally dangerous, felt infinitely more authentic. I thought about Adrian Whitmore, Vivian's fiancé, and his father, Charles Whitmore, one of the most powerful men in international finance, someone whose approval meant everything to my sister's future plans. Charles was old-fashioned, traditional, someone who believed in family values and personal integrity above all else. He was exactly the kind of man who would be deeply disturbed by certain revelations about his future daughter-in-law. And I happened to know things about Vivian that would shatter every preconceived notion Charles had about the woman his son planned to marry. Secrets she thought she had buried in Paris, mistakes she believed no one could ever connect back to her, choices she had made that revealed the true darkness at the heart of her carefully constructed persona.
The game was about to change, and this time, I was going to be the one writing the rules. As I moved through the party, smiling and accepting congratulations that felt increasingly hollow, I began to formulate my strategy. It would require patience, precision, and a willingness to embrace a side of myself I had never fully acknowledged. But for the first time in my life, I felt ready for the battle that had been raging around me for decades. Vivian had started this war. Now I am going to finish it. The morning after the engagement party dawned gray and bitter, matching the desolation that had settled into my bones like winter frost. I sat in my apartment overlooking Central Park, still wearing the black silk dress from the night before, watching joggers make their determined circuits through the autumn landscape below. Their purposeful movement seemed to mock my paralysis, their healthy routine a stark contrast to the wreckage of my carefully planned life. My phone had been buzzing incessantly since 6 a.m., concerned friends who had sensed something wrong at the party, my mother calling from Vermont with worry threading through her voice, even a few reporters who had somehow caught wind of trouble in the Blackstone engagement. But the call I dreaded most came at exactly 9:15, Marcus's name appearing on my screen like a verdict I wasn't ready to hear. Elena, his voice carried the weight of a sleepless night and difficult decisions. I think we need to talk. The conversation that followed was everything I had feared and nothing I had prepared for. Marcus wasn't angry. Anger would have been easier to handle, something I could have fought against or reasoned with. Instead, he was distant, almost clinical, as he explained that he needed time to process everything and figure out how to move forward. The wedding, scheduled for December, was officially postponed. The ring I had worn for 6 months suddenly felt like a shackle, a reminder of promises that had been broken by lies I had never told. He said, "I want to believe you." And those 5 words contained more pain than any accusation could have carried. But Vivian showed me things, Elena. Emails, photographs, receipts. How do I reconcile the woman I thought I knew with evidence that suggests otherwise? After he hung up, I sat in the silence of my apartment for a long time, letting the full weight of Vivian's victory settle around me. She had done it again, with surgical precision and devastating effectiveness. Another relationship destroyed, another dream shattered, another piece of my life reduced to rubble while she walked away clean and triumphant. But this time felt different. This time she had gone too far. By noon, I had made my decision. I showered, dressed in my most professional suit, and took a cab to Hamilton and Associates, the private investigation firm I had researched during the darkest hours of the morning. If Vivian could manufacture evidence to destroy my life, then I could uncover real evidence to destroy hers.
James Hamilton was a thin, sharp-eyed man in his 50s who listened to my story with the detached professionalism of someone who had heard worse. His office walls were lined with commendations from law enforcement agencies and photographs of him shaking hands with various political figures. This was a man who specialized in uncovering secrets, and I could see in his expression that my case intrigued him. "You understand," he said after I had finished explaining the situation, "that what you're asking me to do is essentially compile a dossier on your sister's private life. That's a considerable undertaking, especially given her international connections. It's also expensive." "Money isn't an issue," I replied, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. "I want to know everything: her business dealings in Paris, her personal relationships, her financial situation, any scandals or controversies she might have been involved in. I want to know who Vivian Ashford really is when she thinks no one is watching." Hamilton quoted me a figure that would have made me hesitate under normal circumstances. Now it felt like a bargain. What was money compared to justice? What was my savings account compared to finally making Vivian pay for decades of calculated cruelty? While Hamilton's team began their investigation, I launched my own parallel inquiry. I called old friends from Colombia, colleagues from the art world, anyone who might have crossed paths with Vivian during her years in Europe.
I was looking for patterns, inconsistencies, the kind of small details that might reveal larger truths. The first breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Rebecca Chen, a curator I had worked with at the Met who had spent 2 years at the Musée d'Orsay in Paris. When I mentioned Vivian's name during what I hoped sounded like casual conversation, Rebecca's expression immediately shifted. "Your sister," she said carefully, as if testing the words. "She ran the Galerie Lumière, didn't she, on the left bank?" "Yes," I confirmed, my heart beginning to race. "Do you know it?" Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, clearly debating how much to share. "There were rumors," she finally said, "about the provenance of some of the pieces she was selling, supposedly from a private collector, but the documentation was questionable. The French authorities looked into it, but nothing came of it officially. Still, word gets around. Some people in the community started avoiding her gallery." "Thank you, Rebecca," and I ended the call. But my mind was racing. Vivian had always been secretive about the specifics of her business, deflecting questions about her acquisitions with vague references to private collectors and confidential sources. I had assumed it was typical art world discretion, but now I wondered if there were more sinister reasons for her evasiveness. The next piece of the puzzle came from Hamilton's preliminary report 3 days later. His investigators had been thorough, tracing Vivian's activities across Europe with the methodical precision of bloodhounds following a scent. What they had uncovered was a pattern of behavior that was both shocking in its scope and unsurprising in its fundamental dishonesty. "Your sister," he explained as he spread documents across his conference table, "has been living well beyond her legitimate means for several years. The gallery in Paris was struggling financially, despite what she told your family. She's been funding her lifestyle through a combination of questionable art deals and what appears to be systematic fraud."
The evidence was damning. Bank records showed payments from collectors for pieces that were later discovered to be forgeries. Insurance claims for stolen artwork that had actually been sold privately. Most damaging of all, there was documentation of her involvement with a ring of art forgers operating out of Eastern Europe, selling fake masterpieces to wealthy Americans who were too embarrassed to admit they had been duped. But the most devastating revelation was personal rather than professional. Hidden among the financial records was evidence of an ongoing affair with Marcel Dubois, a married French politician whose wife was a prominent figure in Parisian society. The relationship had been conducted with elaborate secrecy, funded by Vivian's illegally obtained money, and documented in a series of electronic communications that left no doubt about its nature. "This Dubois fellow," Hamilton continued, "is currently being considered for a ministerial position in the new government. If his wife discovered this affair, it would destroy not only his marriage, but his political career. Your sister appears to have been using this relationship for more than just romance. Dubois has connections in the art world that would have been useful for legitimizing questionable pieces." As I absorbed the implications of what Hamilton had uncovered, I felt a complex mixture of vindication and revulsion. Part of me was triumphant. Finally, I had proof of Vivian's true nature, evidence that would shatter her carefully constructed facade. But another part of me was disturbed by the depths of her deception, the calculated cruelty with which she had manipulated not just me, but countless others. The woman I had grown up with, the sister I had loved despite everything, was revealed to be something far darker than I had ever imagined. She wasn't just petty or jealous or competitive. She was genuinely criminal, willing to commit fraud, adultery, and emotional terrorism to get what she wanted. The realization should have made my decision easier, but instead it left me feeling strangely hollow. Armed with Hamilton's dossier, I began planning my counterattack. The key was timing and audience. Vivian's engagement to Adrian Whitmore was scheduled to be announced officially in 2 weeks, with the wedding planned for the following spring. Charles Whitmore, Adrian's father, was a man who valued reputation above all else. If I could present him with irrefutable proof of Vivian's criminal activities and moral corruption, he would have no choice but to intervene. But I needed to be careful.
One misstep, one moment of appearing vindictive rather than concerned, and Vivian could turn the entire situation to her advantage. She was a master manipulator, capable of spinning any attack into evidence of my instability or jealousy. I had to be perfect, unassailable, absolutely certain that every fact could be verified and every accusation could be proven. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Adrian called me directly, his voice tight with concern and confusion. "Elena, I need to talk to you. Vivian told me about what happened at your engagement party, but something doesn't feel right. Could we meet somewhere private?" We arranged to meet at a quiet cafe in the village, away from the social circles where gossip traveled faster than wildfire. Adrian arrived looking haggard, as if he hadn't slept properly in days. He was a good man, I realized with a pang of guilt. Honest, trusting, exactly the kind of person Vivian specialized in deceiving. "She told me about Marcus," he began without preamble, "about the affair you supposedly had. But Elena, I've known you for months now, and it doesn't fit. You're not that kind of person." And the way she told me about it, there was something in her voice. I don't know how to explain it, but it sounded almost pleasant. I had prepared for this moment, had rehearsed various approaches, but sitting across from Adrian, seeing the genuine confusion and concern in his eyes, I felt the full weight of what I was about to do. I was going to destroy his happiness to preserve my own, shatter his illusions to protect my future. In that moment, I understood exactly how Vivian must have felt all those times she had systematically dismantled my life. The parallel should have stopped me. Instead, it steeled my resolve. "Adrian," I said carefully, "what I'm about to tell you is going to be difficult to hear, but you have a right to know who you're planning to marry."
The evidence was damning. Bank records showed payments from collectors for pieces that were later discovered to be forgeries. Insurance claims for stolen artwork that had actually been sold privately. Most damaging of all, there was documentation of her involvement with a ring of art forgers operating out of Eastern Europe, selling fake masterpieces to wealthy Americans who were too embarrassed to admit they had been duped. But the most devastating revelation was personal rather than professional. Hidden among the financial records was evidence of an ongoing affair with Marcel Dubois, a married French politician whose wife was a prominent figure in Parisian society. The relationship had been conducted with elaborate secrecy, funded by Vivian's illegally obtained money, and documented in a series of electronic communications that left no doubt about its nature. "This Dubois fellow," Hamilton continued, "is currently being considered for a ministerial position in the new government. If his wife discovered this affair, it would destroy not only his marriage, but his political career. Your sister appears to have been using this relationship for more than just romance. Dubois has connections in the art world that would have been useful for legitimizing questionable pieces." As I absorbed the implications of what Hamilton had uncovered, I felt a complex mixture of vindication and revulsion. Part of me was triumphant. Finally, I had proof of Vivian's true nature, evidence that would shatter her carefully constructed facade. But another part of me was disturbed by the depths of her deception, the calculated cruelty with which she had manipulated not just me, but countless others. The woman I had grown up with, the sister I had loved despite everything, was revealed to be something far darker than I had ever imagined. She wasn't just petty or jealous or competitive. She was genuinely criminal, willing to commit fraud, adultery, and emotional terrorism to get what she wanted. The realization should have made my decision easier, but instead it left me feeling strangely hollow. Armed with Hamilton's dossier, I began planning my counterattack. The key was timing and audience. Vivian's engagement to Adrian Whitmore was scheduled to be announced officially in 2 weeks, with the wedding planned for the following spring. Charles Whitmore, Adrian's father, was a man who valued reputation above all else. If I could present him with irrefutable proof of Vivian's criminal activities and moral corruption, he would have no choice but to intervene. But I needed to be careful. One misstep, one moment of appearing vindictive rather than concerned, and Vivian could turn the entire situation to her advantage. She was a master manipulator, capable of spinning any attack into evidence of my instability or jealousy. I had to be perfect,
unassailable, absolutely certain that every fact could be verified and every accusation could be proven. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Adrian called me directly, his voice tight with concern and confusion. "Elena, I need to talk to you. Vivian told me about what happened at your engagement party, but something doesn't feel right. Could we meet somewhere private?" We arranged to meet at a quiet cafe in the village, away from the social circles where gossip traveled faster than wildfire. Adrian arrived looking haggard, as if he hadn't slept properly in days. He was a good man, I realized with a pang of guilt. Honest, trusting, exactly the kind of person Vivian specialized in deceiving. "She told me about Marcus," he began without preamble, "about the affair you supposedly had. But Elena, I've known you for months now, and it doesn't fit. You're not that kind of person." And the way she told me about it, there was something in her voice. I don't know how to explain it, but it sounded almost pleasant. I had prepared for this moment, had rehearsed various approaches, but sitting across from Adrian, seeing the genuine confusion and concern in his eyes, I felt the full weight of what I was about to do. I was going to destroy his happiness to preserve my own, shatter his illusions to protect my future. In that moment, I understood exactly how Vivian must have felt all those times she had systematically dismantled my life. The parallel should have stopped me. Instead, it steeled my resolve. "Adrian," I said carefully, "what I'm about to tell you is going to be difficult to hear, but you have a right to know who you're planning to marry."
I opened my briefcase and withdrew Hamilton's report, along with copies of the most damning evidence. As Adrian read through the documents, I watched his face transform from confusion to shock to something approaching devastation. The financial records, the forged provenance documents, the photographs of Vivian with Marcel Dubois. Each revelation hit him like a physical blow. "This can't be right," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Vivian would never... She's not capable of..." "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it, but it's all verifiable. The investigators I hired are completely reputable, and every document has been authenticated. Your father can have his own people confirm it if he needs to." Adrian sat in silence for a long time, staring at the evidence spread across our small table. When he finally looked up, his eyes were haunted. "Why are you showing me this? If you're angry about what she did to your engagement, wouldn't it be easier just to confront her directly?" It was a fair question, and one that deserved an honest answer. Because confronting Vivian directly would be useless. She spent her entire life perfecting the art of turning herself into the victim, making her accusers look unstable or vindictive. But your father... I paused, choosing my words carefully. Charles Whitmore is a man who values integrity above all else. If he knew what kind of person his son was planning to marry, he would intervene. And unlike me, he has the power to make Vivian face real consequences for her actions. Adrian nodded slowly, understanding the logic even as he struggled with the emotional implications. "You want me to tell my father?" "I want you to protect yourself," I corrected, "and your family's reputation. Imagine what would happen if these revelations came out after the wedding. The scandal would destroy not just Vivian, but you and your father as well. At least this way, you can end things quietly, before too much damage is done." He gathered up the documents with shaking hands, his movements mechanical and deliberate. "I need time to think about this." "Of course," I said. "But Adrian, don't take too long. Every day you wait is another day Vivian has to prepare her defenses. And trust me, she's very good at defending herself." After he left, I sat alone in the cafe for another hour, processing what I had just set in motion. There was no going back now. Either Adrian would take the evidence to his father, or he would confront Vivian directly. Either way, the secret war between my sister and me was about to become very public, very quickly. 2 days later, my phone rang at 7 in the morning. Vivian's name appeared on the screen,
and I knew immediately that Adrian had made his choice. "You poisonous little bitch," she hissed, her carefully cultivated continental accent slipping to reveal the raw fury underneath. "What did you do? What lies did you spread to Adrian?" "No lies, Vivian. Just truth. Something you wouldn't recognize if it bit you." "You have no idea what you've done," she continued, her voice escalating toward hysteria. "Charles Whitmore is demanding proof that I can refute every single allegation. He's threatening to disinherit Adrian if he goes through with the wedding. You've destroyed everything, just because you're jealous that I found happiness first." The accusation should have stung, but instead it felt almost anticlimactic. After 28 years of Vivian's manipulations, her attempt to paint me as the villain felt pathetically predictable. "I'm jealous?" I laughed, surprised by the genuine amusement in my voice. "Vivian, I'm not the one who spent her entire adult life committing fraud to fund a lifestyle she can't afford. I'm not the one having an affair with a married politician while planning my own wedding. I'm not the one who built her entire identity on lies. Those documents are fabricated. Private investigators will say anything if you pay them enough." "Then you should have no problem proving that to Charles," I said sweetly. "I'm sure a man with his resources can verify the authenticity of evidence very quickly."
The silence that followed was filled with such palpable rage that I could almost feel it through the phone line. When Vivian finally spoke again, her voice was ice-cold and deadly quiet. "This isn't over," she said. "You think you've won, but you have no idea what I'm capable of when someone tries to destroy me. You want to play this game? Fine. But remember, Alina, I know secrets about you that you've forgotten you even have. And unlike your pathetic investigation, mine won't need to be based on facts." The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone with a mixture of triumph and dread. I had won this battle, but the war was far from over. Vivian's threat wasn't idle. She had spent decades perfecting the art of character assassination, and now I had given her the motivation to use every tool in her arsenal against me. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of her threats. Let her come. Let her try to destroy me with whatever fictional scandal she could manufacture. I had finally learned to fight back, and I had no intention of returning to the role of victim. The real battle was just beginning. But I was ready for it. After 28 years of being Vivian's prey, I had finally become something far more dangerous, her equal. The question now was whether either of us would survive what came next. The summons came on a Tuesday morning, delivered by courier to my apartment with the weight and formality of a legal document. Charles Whitmore requested my presence at his Fifth Avenue office at 2 o'clock that afternoon to discuss matters of mutual concern regarding family reputation and recent allegations. The heavy cream paper bore the Whitmore Industries letterhead, each letter embossed with the kind of precision that spoke of old money and older power. I dressed carefully for the meeting, choosing a navy suit that projected both professionalism and respectability. This wasn't a social call. This was a reckoning, and I needed to look like someone whose word could be trusted absolutely. As I walked through the marble lobby of the Whitmore building, past security guards who nodded with the deference reserved for expected guests, I felt the full weight of what I had set in motion. Charles Whitmore's office occupied the entire top floor, its windows offering a commanding view of Central Park and the Manhattan skyline beyond. The man himself was smaller than I had expected, perhaps 5'8", with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of my appearance within seconds of my arrival. This was someone who had built an empire through careful observation and strategic thinking, and I could feel the intensity of his assessment like a physical force. "Miss Ashford," he said, gesturing to a leather chair positioned precisely across from his massive mahogany desk, "I trust you understand why I wanted to speak with you personally." "I believe so, Mr. Whitmore." I sat down, keeping my spine straight and my hands folded calmly in my lap.
Adrian shared some concerns about my sister's background and business practices. Concerns. Charles repeated the word as if tasting something unpleasant. That's one way to put it. Another way would be to say that you've presented evidence suggesting that the woman my son plans to marry is a criminal. He opened a folder on his desk, revealing copies of Hamilton's investigation report. Before we proceed, I need to understand your motivations. Are you acting out of sisterly concern, or is this revenge for what happened at your engagement party?
Charles studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Tell me about this pattern. For the next hour, I laid out 28 years of Vivian's systematic cruelty, from childhood incidents of sabotage to the sophisticated character assassination that had destroyed my engagement. I spoke about David Morrison and the fabricated suicide attempt, about the job opportunity in Paris that mysteriously disappeared, about dozens of smaller betrayals that had shaped the trajectory of my life. Charles listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on a legal pad, his face growing grimmer with each revelation. "You understand," he said when I had finished, "that what you're describing is sociopathic behavior. You're suggesting that your sister is fundamentally incapable of genuine human connection, that she views relationships as weapons to be wielded for personal advantage." "I'm not suggesting it," I replied. "I'm stating it as fact. Vivian doesn't love Adrian. She loves what he represents: status, security, access to power. If she truly cared about him, she wouldn't have been having an affair with Marcel Dubois throughout their entire relationship." Charles's expression darkened at the mention of the French politician. "Yes, the affair. My investigators have confirmed the authenticity of those photographs and communications. The timeline is particularly damning. It appears the relationship with Dubois continued even after she accepted Adrian's proposal." "Mr. Whitmore," I said, leaning forward slightly, "I know how this must look, a scorned woman presenting evidence against her rival. But consider this. If I were making these allegations up, would I have chosen charges that could be so easily verified? Art fraud leaves paper trails. Forged provenance documents can be examined by experts. Financial irregularities show up in bank records. Everything I've presented to you can be independently confirmed." "It already has been," Charles said grimly. "I had my security team verify every document, cross-reference every transaction, authenticate every piece of evidence. Miss Ashford, your sister isn't just morally questionable. She's facing potential criminal charges in 3 countries. The French authorities are reopening their investigation into the forged Renaissance drawings. The Americans are looking into tax evasion related to her unreported income. And the Italians are interested in her role in smuggling artifacts out of archaeological sites." The scope of Vivian's criminal activities was staggering, far beyond what even Hamilton's investigation had uncovered. I felt a mixture of vindication and horror. Vindication that my instincts about my sister had been correct. Horror at the realization of just how deep her corruption ran. "What will you do?" I asked. Charles was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the city beyond his windows. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of difficult decisions made for the greater good. "I'm going to save my son from making the biggest mistake of his life. But first, I want you to understand something. What you've set in motion today will have consequences far beyond your personal vendetta against your sister. Adrian loves her, or believes he does. Breaking this engagement won't just end a relationship, it'll shatter his faith in his own judgment. He's going to question every decision he's ever made, every person he's ever trusted. That's a heavy burden to carry." The guilt hit me like a physical blow. In my focus on destroying Vivian, I had pushed aside thoughts of the collateral damage my actions would cause.
Adrian was innocent in all of this. A good man whose only crime was falling in love with a master manipulator. Now he would pay the price for both my sister's deception and my need for revenge. "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. But Adrian deserves to know the truth before he legally binds himself to someone who will ultimately destroy him. Vivian doesn't just ruin relationships, she ruins lives. If he marries her, she'll systematically isolate him from friends and family, manipulate his business decisions to serve her own interests, and use his love as a weapon against him. I've watched her do it before. "I believe you," Charles said, "which is why I'm going to act on this information despite the pain it will cause my son. But understand this, your war with your sister ends here. Whatever happens next, you don't get to claim victory. You've simply prevented a greater tragedy from occurring."
As I left the Whitmore building that afternoon, I felt simultaneously triumphant and hollow. I had achieved what I set out to do. Vivian's carefully constructed future was crumbling around her, and for the first time in our lives, she was the one facing consequences for her actions. But the victory felt pyrrhic, tainted by the knowledge that innocent people were being hurt in the crossfire. The explosion came exactly 48 hours later. Adrian called me at 6 in the morning, his voice raw with emotion and barely controlled fury. "It's done," he said without preamble. "My father confronted her last night with everything. The fraud, the forgeries, the affair. She tried to deny it at first, then tried to claim she was being framed, then finally broke down and admitted to most of it. The engagement is off." I should have felt satisfaction, but instead I felt strangely empty. "How are you holding up?" "How do you think?" His voice cracked slightly. "The woman I planned to marry, the person I thought I knew better than anyone else in the world, turns out to be a stranger, worse than a stranger, a criminal who was using me to legitimize her lifestyle and gain access to my family's connections. How does someone recover from that kind of betrayal?" Before I could respond, he continued, his tone becoming harder, more accusatory. "But you know what the worst part is. You knew. You've known what she was capable of for years, and you never said anything. You let me fall in love with her, let me plan a future with her, let me introduce her to my family and friends. You could have warned me at any point, but you didn't. You waited until she hurt you, then you used me as a weapon in your personal war." The accusation stung because it contained a kernel of truth. I had known Vivian's nature, had understood her capacity for manipulation and cruelty, but I had also convinced myself that her relationship with Adrian was different, that perhaps she had found genuine happiness that might change her fundamental character. It was a naive hope, but it had allowed me to rationalize my silence. "Adrian, Don't," he interrupted. "Don't try to justify it. You're just as manipulative as she is, just more subtle about it. You used my love for her to destroy her, and you used my father's protection of me to ensure she couldn't fight back. The only difference between you and Vivian is that your lies are by omission rather than commission." The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone with a sick feeling in my stomach. Adrian's words echoed in my mind, forcing me to confront uncomfortable truths about my own behavior. Had I really been protecting him? Or had I simply found a sophisticated way to hurt my sister while maintaining plausible deniability about my motives? The answer came later that day in the form of a visit I should have anticipated, but had somehow failed to prepare for. Vivian appeared at my apartment at 3 in the afternoon, looking like a woman who had spent the past 48 hours in hell. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled, her makeup smudged, her designer clothes wrinkled as if she had slept in them. But her eyes burned with a fury so intense it was almost incandescent. "Let me in," she said, her voice deadly quiet. "We need to finish this." I stepped aside and she walked into my living room with a measured gait of someone trying very hard to maintain control. She didn't sit down, didn't remove her coat, just stood in the center of the room like a predator preparing to strike.
"Congratulations," she said, the word dripping with venom. "You finally managed to destroy something I actually cared about. Adrian he was different. He wasn't just another mark or another means to an end. I actually loved him in whatever broken way I'm capable of loving anyone, and you took that away from me." "You took it away from yourself," I replied, surprised by how calm I sounded. "Every crime you committed, every lie you told, every betrayal you orchestrated, those were your choices, Vivian. I just made sure the consequences finally caught up to you." She laughed like breaking glass. "My choices? Do you want to know about choices, Elena? Do you want to know why I became the person you hate so much?" Something in her tone made me step back involuntarily. There was a raw desperation in her voice that I had never heard before, a crack in the perfectly polished facade that had defined her for as long as I could remember. "You think this all started with sibling rivalry. You think I was just jealous of Daddy's little princess, the sweet daughter who could do no wrong. But it was never about you, Elena. It was about them." Them. Our parents. The words came out like a curse. Perfect David and Catherine Ashford, pillars of the community, devoted to each other and their precious younger daughter. Do you know what it's like to be 5 years old and realize that your parents love your sister more than they love you? To understand that no matter what you do, no matter how hard you try, you'll always be second best in their eyes.
I stared at her, struggling to process what she was saying. That's not true. Mom and Dad love us both equally. No, they don't. The words exploded out of her with such force that I flinched. They never did. You were the miracle baby, the one who came after they thought they might never have another child. You were perfect from the moment you were born. Sweet, compliant, everything they wanted in a daughter. And I was just there. The practice run, the rough draft. Tears were streaming down her face now, cutting tracks through her smudged makeup. Do you know what it does to a child to realize that their existence is conditional? That love is something you have to earn, something that can be withdrawn if you're not good enough? I spent my entire childhood trying to be perfect, trying to be worthy of the love they gave you so effortlessly. And when that didn't work, I learned to take what I needed instead. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. All these years, I had assumed Vivian's cruelty stemmed from inherent maliciousness, from some fundamental flaw in her character. I had never considered that it might be rooted in pain, in a desperate need for love and validation that had been warped into something destructive. "Vivian," I started, but she held up a hand to stop me. "Don't you dare pity me," she snarled. "I'm not telling you this to excuse what I've done or to make you feel sorry for me. I'm telling you because I want you to understand what you've really accomplished here. You haven't just destroyed my engagement or exposed my crimes. You've proven that I was right all along, that love is conditional, that loyalty is a luxury I can't afford, and that the only person I can count on is myself." She walked to the window, staring out at the city beyond with hollow eyes. Adrian loved me despite my flaws, despite my past, despite everything that made me unworthy. For the first time in my life, I thought that I had found someone who could accept me as I am. And you took that away from me to satisfy your need for revenge. He would have left eventually. I hated how weak the words sounded. Once he discovered the truth about who you really are, the truth is that I'm a broken person who learned to survive in a world that never wanted her. The truth is that I became a monster because it was easier than staying vulnerable. The truth is that you had the chance to save me, to help me become someone better, and instead, you chose to destroy me. The accusation hung in the air between us, heavy with implications I wasn't ready to face. Had I really had the chance to save her? Could I have chosen compassion over vengeance, understanding over retribution? Or was this just another manipulation, another way for Vivian to make herself the victim of circumstances beyond her control? "I need to know something," she said, her voice suddenly quiet and serious. "When you went to Adrian with that evidence, when you set this whole thing in motion, did you do it because you genuinely wanted to protect him, or did you do it because you wanted to hurt me?" The question struck at the heart of everything I had been trying not to examine about my own motives.
I wanted to say that it had been about justice, about protecting an innocent man from a predatory woman. But standing there, looking at my sister's devastated face, I couldn't quite bring myself to lie. Both, I admitted. I wanted to protect Adrian, but I also wanted you to finally face consequences for what you've done to me over the years. I wanted you to know what it felt like to have something precious torn away from you. Vivian nodded slowly, as if I had confirmed something she already knew. At least you're honest about it. That's more than I expected. She walked to the door, then paused with her hand on the handle. You should know that the French authorities will probably want to interview you as part of their investigation. Your cooperation will be appreciated. And, Elena, this really is over now. Whatever was between us, whatever twisted family dynamic we've been playing out for 28 years, it ends here. I'm leaving New York tonight, and I won't be coming back. Where will you go? Somewhere far enough away that I can't hurt you anymore, and somewhere far enough away that you can't hurt me either. After she left, I sat alone in my apartment for hours, trying to process everything that had happened. I had won. Vivian was gone, her crimes exposed, her future destroyed, but victory felt nothing like I had imagined it would. Instead of satisfaction, I felt hollow. Instead of justice, I felt complicit in a tragedy that could have been prevented if I had chosen love over vengeance. The phone rang as darkness settled over the city. Marcus's name appeared on the screen, and I felt my heart skip a beat.
Elena? His voice was tentative, uncertain. I heard about what happened with Vivian and the Whitmores. Adrian told me about the investigation, about the evidence you uncovered. Marcus, I started, but he continued before I could finish. I owe you an apology, he said. A massive, unforgivable apology. I should have trusted you, should have questioned the evidence instead of accepting it at face value. I should have known that you would never betray me the way Vivian claimed. You couldn't have known, I said, though part of me wondered if that was true. She's very good at making lies look like truth. Can we talk, he asked, in person? I know I have no right to ask, but I need to see you. I need to try to make this right. As I agreed to meet him the next day, I realized that my war with Vivian had ended not with triumph, but with the kind of devastating clarity that comes only from looking into the abyss and recognizing yourself staring back. I had saved my relationship with Marcus, but at the cost of my sister's future and my own peace of mind. The question now was whether redemption was possible for any of us, or whether we were all too damaged by the battle to find our way back to something resembling happiness. The coffee shop where Marcus and I met the next morning was unremarkable. A small place in the village with mismatched furniture and the kind of studied casualness that belonged to a neighborhood still finding its identity. I arrived early, choosing a table in the back corner where we could talk without being overheard, and spent the 15 minutes before he arrived rehearsing conversations that would probably never happen. When Marcus walked through the door, I felt my breath catch in my throat. He looked older somehow, as if the past week had aged him months. There were lines around his eyes that I didn't remember, a tension in his shoulders that spoke of sleepless nights and difficult realizations. But when he saw me, his face softened into something that might have been relief. Alina. He said my name like a prayer, like something he had been afraid he might never have the right to say again. Thank you for agreeing to see me. Of course, I replied, though my voice came out smaller than I had intended. We need to talk about what happened. He sat down across from me, his hands wrapped around a coffee cup that he had forgotten to drink. For a moment, we just looked at each other. Two people trying to navigate the wreckage of everything we had thought we understood about our relationship. I don't know where to start, he said finally. How do you apologize for believing the worst about someone you claim to love? How do you ask forgiveness for throwing away trust so easily? You start by understanding that Vivian is very good at what she does. She's had decades of practice making lies look like truth, making victims look like villains. What happened to us wasn't a failure of your character, Marcus. It was proof of her expertise. But I should have known, he insisted, leaning forward with an intensity that reminded me of why I had fallen in love with him in the first place.
I should have trusted my knowledge of who you are instead of letting doubt poison everything. When someone shows you who they are consistently over time, you don't throw that away because of allegations from someone with obvious motivations for lying.
I wanted to fight. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to grab his hands, to make him look into my eyes and see the truth there. I wanted to demand that we call Professor Hartwell right now, to insist that we examine these so-called photographs together, to tear apart Vivian's story piece by fabricated piece until the truth emerged from the wreckage. But I knew it wouldn't matter. The seed of doubt had been planted, and like all poisonous seeds, it would grow in the darkness of uncertainty until it choked out everything else. Even if I could prove my innocence, and the rational part of my mind knew that I could, eventually, the damage was already done. Marcus would always wonder if there was some truth to Vivian's story. He would analyze every interaction I'd ever had with male colleagues, every late night at the office, every conference or business dinner. The trust that formed the foundation of our relationship had been shattered, and trust, once broken, never quite fit back together the same way. As I walked back into the party alone, leaving Marcus on the terrace to contemplate the ruins of our future, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. The Elena who had walked out of that room 20 minutes ago had been someone who believed in fairness, who trusted that truth would always triumph over lies, who maintained faith that good intentions and honest communication could solve any problem. The Elena walking back in was someone harder, colder, infinitely more dangerous. She understood with crystalline clarity that some battles couldn't be won with honesty and good intentions. Some enemies required a different kind of warfare altogether. I found myself scanning the crowd for Vivian, my eyes cutting through the beautiful, glittering facade of Manhattan society to locate my target. She was standing near the grand piano, holding court with a small group of admirers, her laughter bright and musical as she regaled them with some charming anecdote about her life in Paris. She looked radiant, triumphant, like a woman who had just accomplished something wonderful and was basking in the afterglow of success. The sight of her happiness, while my world crumbled around me, ignited something in my chest that felt like molten metal. For 28 years, I had been the good daughter, the understanding sister, the one who absorbed Vivian's cruelty and somehow transformed it into forgiveness. I had made excuses for her behavior, rationalized her actions, found ways to blame myself for the way she hurt me. No more. As I watched her charm another victim into her web, memories flooded back with startling clarity. Not the soft, focused reminiscences of childhood that I had carefully cultivated over the years, but the sharp, unforgiving truth of what growing up with Vivian had actually been like. I remembered being 7 years old, showing our parents a drawing I had made at school, a simple crayon sketch of our family standing in front of our house. I had been so proud of it, had spent careful attention on the details, the blue shutters on the windows, the red roses in our mother's garden, the way I had tried to capture the exact shade of our father's hair. But when Vivian saw it, her face twisted with something ugly and primal. Elena copied that from a book she had announced with the casual cruelty that children wield so effortlessly. I saw her looking at it yesterday. She's not creative enough to make something like that on her own. Our parents had laughed it off, chalking it up to sibling rivalry, but the damage had been done. I had thrown the drawing away that night, had never shown them another piece of my artwork, had internalized the message that my creativity was worthless, stolen, somehow fraudulent.
You were, she agreed, but you were also choosing to stay engaged with someone who consistently harmed you. Every time you forgave her, every time you made excuses for her behavior, every time you hoped she would change, you were participating in a system that allowed the abuse to continue. The insight was painful, but necessary. I began to understand that my role in our dynamic hadn't been passive, even when I felt powerless. I had chosen, again and again, to believe in a version of Vivian that didn't exist, to hope for a sister who was incapable of genuine love or change. My goodness had enabled her badness. My forgiveness had licensed her cruelty. What does that make me? I asked during one particularly difficult session. If I was complicit in my own abuse, if I helped create the conditions that allowed it to continue. It makes you human, Dr. Chen said simply.
It makes you someone who wanted to love and be loved, even in impossible circumstances. The tragedy isn't that you participated in a destructive dynamic, it's that you were conditioned from childhood to believe that was what love looked like. As the months passed, I began to rebuild my relationship with my parents, finally able to have honest conversations about the family dynamics that had shaped both Vivian and me. My mother cried when I told her about Vivian's perception of conditional love, about how our sister had felt like a practice run rather than a cherished daughter. "We never meant for her to feel that way," she said, her voice breaking. "We loved you both so much, but maybe we didn't know how to show it in ways that both of you could understand. Vivian was always so independent, so self-sufficient. We thought she didn't need as much attention, as much reassurance." My father, typically more reserved with his emotions, struggled to accept that his well-intentioned parenting might have contributed to Vivian's eventual criminality. "We tried to be fair," he said repeatedly. "We tried to love you both equally." "Trying to be fair isn't the same as being emotionally available," I explained gently. "Vivian needed different things than I did, and when she didn't get them, she learned to take what she needed through manipulation and control." The conversations were painful for all of us, but they were also healing. For the first time in decades, we were talking about our family honestly, acknowledging the imperfections and failed communications that had created so much damage. It wasn't about assigning blame, it was about understanding how good people, with good intentions, could still create environments where children learned unhealthy patterns of relating to others. Meanwhile, the legal consequences of Vivian's actions continued to unfold with devastating efficiency. The French authorities formally charged her with art fraud and conspiracy to traffic stolen cultural artifacts. The IRS opened an investigation into unreported income and tax evasion. Most damaging of all, Marcel Dubois' wife discovered the affair and initiated divorce proceedings that would inevitably expose every detail of their relationship to public scrutiny. I followed the news coverage with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Part of me felt vindicated. Finally, Vivian was facing real consequences for her actions. But another part of me wondered if this was what justice actually looked like, or if it was just the institutionalized version of the same cycle of revenge that had defined our relationship. The answer came in an unexpected form, a letter from Vivian herself, forwarded through my lawyer since she didn't have my current address. The envelope was postmarked from a small town in Switzerland, and the handwriting on the outside was shaky, uncertain, nothing like the confident script I remembered from her previous correspondence. The letter inside was 3 pages long, written on simple white paper without any of the elegant stationery I would have expected from my image-conscious sister. The words themselves were equally stripped of artifice, raw and honest in a way that Vivian had never been before. "Elena," it began, "I don't expect you to forgive me, and I'm not writing this to ask for your pity or your help. I'm writing this because I need to tell you some truths that I should have shared years ago, before everything spiraled so far out of control. You were right about me. I am exactly the kind of person you accused me of being. Manipulative, cruel, incapable of genuine love or connection. But what you don't understand is that I didn't choose to become that person. I was broken so early, so completely, that I never learned how to be anything else. The therapist I've been court-ordered to see has helped me understand that what I did to you, what I did to everyone I claimed to love, was my way of trying to feel powerful in a world where I had always felt powerless. Every time I hurt you, every time I destroyed something you cared about, I was trying to prove that I mattered, that I had the ability to affect other people's lives in meaningful ways. It was never about you, Elena. You were just the safest target, the person I knew would always forgive me, always take me back, always hope that I could change. I used your love against you because it was the only power I had, and I was too broken to understand that real power comes from building rather than destroying. I know that none of this excuses what I did.
I know that understanding the reasons for abuse doesn't erase its impact. But I wanted you to know that your decision to fight back, to finally refuse to be my victim, probably saved both of our lives. If you had continued to enable my behavior, I would have eventually destroyed everything good in my world, including whatever small capacity for growth I might still possess. I'm facing serious prison time, probably 5 to 7 years across multiple jurisdictions. My lawyer says that cooperation and genuine remorse might reduce the sentence, but I'm not counting on it. What I am counting on is the chance to use that time to become someone different. Someone who might someday be worthy of the forgiveness I don't deserve. I don't know if I'll ever see you again. Part of me hopes I won't, because I think we're both healthier when we're not in each other's lives. But if our paths do cross someday, I want you to know that I finally understand what I took from you all those years. And I want you to know that the person who emerges from prison, if she emerges at all, will be someone who has learned to build rather than destroy. Take care of yourself, little sister. Take care of the beautiful life you're building without me in it. Vivian. I read the letter 3 times before the tears came, and when they did, they came with a force that surprised me. I wasn't crying for the sister that I had lost. That loss had happened years ago, long before our final confrontation. I was crying for the sister I had never had, the relationship that might have been possible if we had both been different people, raised in different circumstances, shaped by different wounds. But mostly, I was crying with relief. The war was finally, truly over. Not because one of us had won, but because we had both finally chosen to stop fighting. Marcus and I rekindled our relationship slowly, carefully, with the deliberate attention of 2 people who understood how precious and fragile trust could be. Our second engagement, 6 months later, was nothing like the first. No elaborate party, no public celebration, just a quiet moment in his apartment where he asked if I was ready to build a future together. And I said yes. "We're different people than we were before," he said as he slipped the ring onto my finger. A new ring, simpler than the first, chosen together rather than as a surprise. But maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe we needed to be broken a little to understand how to put the pieces back together properly. Our wedding, the following spring, was small and intimate, family and close friends only, held in my parents' garden in Vermont rather than some grand Manhattan venue. There were no dramatic revelations, no last-minute catastrophes, no hidden enemies waiting in the wings to destroy our happiness. Just 2 people who had learned the hard way that love required both vulnerability and strength, forgiveness and boundaries, hope and realism. As I looked out at the faces of the people who had supported us through our darkest moments, I realized that this was what victory actually looked like. Not the destruction of my enemies or the satisfaction of revenge, but the quiet triumph of building something beautiful on the foundation of hard-won wisdom. Vivian was conspicuously absent, but for the first time in my life, her absence felt like freedom rather than loss. I no longer define myself in opposition to her cruelty or in spite of her interference. I was just Elena, flawed, human, but finally authentically whole. The dance Marcus and I shared as husband and wife was nothing like the elaborate choreography of manipulation and counter-manipulation that had defined my relationship with my sister. It was simple, honest, imperfect. The kind of dance that 2 people could keep dancing for the rest of their lives without either of them losing themselves in the music. As the evening wound down and our guests began to drift away, I found myself standing alone for a moment on the terrace where my parents had hosted so many family gatherings over the years. The view was achingly familiar. Rolling hills dotted with farmhouses, forests that changed color with the seasons, a landscape that had remained constant through all the upheavals of my personal life. "Any regrets?" Marcus asked,
coming up behind me and wrapping his arms around my waist. I considered the question seriously, thinking about all the choices that had led us to this moment. The investigation, the revelations, the destruction of my sister's life, the painful process of rebuilding everything from the ground up. No, I said finally, and realized I meant it. No regrets, just gratitude that we found our way here, despite everything that tried to prevent it. The future stretched out before us, uncertain but promising, like a road that disappeared over the horizon but showed clear signs of having been traveled by others who had made the journey successfully. We would face challenges, make mistakes, hurt each other in small ways that would require forgiveness and growth, but we would face them together as partners who understood the difference between love and enabling, between loyalty and complicity, between forgiveness and surrender. Somewhere in Switzerland, Vivian was beginning her own journey toward redemption or deeper destruction, a path I could no longer walk with her, could no longer influence through my choices. That was her story to write now, just as this was mine. And for the first time in 28 years, I was free to write it without looking over my shoulder, without waiting for the next attack, without defining myself by the wounds that had shaped me for so long. The war was over. Real life could finally begin. 5 years later. The morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our Tribeca loft, casting geometric patterns across the hardwood floors that took Marcus and me 3 months to choose. Everything about our home had been selected with the kind of deliberate care that comes from understanding how precious stability can be, how important it is to build a foundation that can weather whatever storms might come. I stood in our kitchen watching the coffee drip into the carafe while reviewing the final proofs for the exhibition catalog that would launch next week. The Metropolitan Museum of Art's newest wing, dedicated to the ethical acquisition and display of recovered stolen artifacts, represented 3 years of my life's work, a project that had grown from my own painful education about the dark side of the art world. The Reclaimed Heritage Initiative, I murmured to myself, testing how the title sounded aloud. It was more than just an exhibition. It was a statement about redemption, about the possibility of making amends for past wrongs, about transforming painful knowledge into positive action. Marcus emerged from the bedroom, already dressed in his suit but with his tie hanging loose around his neck, a small imperfection that I had learned to love because it reminded me that even the most put-together people had moments of vulnerability. "Big day," he said, kissing my cheek as he reached around me for his coffee mug. "How are you feeling about tonight?" Tonight. The opening gala for the exhibition, where 300 of New York's most influential art collectors, museum directors, and cultural critics would gather to celebrate not just the return of stolen artifacts to their countries of origin, but the transparency and accountability that the art world had so desperately needed. It was the culmination of everything I had worked toward since the destruction of my relationship with Vivian had forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about the industry I had devoted my career to. Nervous, I admitted. Excited. Terrified. All of the above. You realize you're about to become one of the most influential voices in art repatriation ethics, Marcus said, his voice warm with pride. The Times article called you the conscience of the contemporary art world. That's not something that happens by accident. The article. I had read it 3 times, still struggling to reconcile the person described in those pages with my own sense of myself. Elena Blackstone, the journalist had written, has transformed personal tragedy into professional triumph, using her intimate knowledge of art fraud to create new standards for ethical acquisition that are being adopted by museums worldwide. Personal tragedy. That was one way to describe what had happened with Vivian, I supposed. Clinical, sanitized, stripped of the raw emotion and devastating choices that had actually characterized those dark months. But perhaps that distance was necessary.
perhaps some experiences could only be understood properly when viewed through the lens of time and perspective. "Any word from the Swiss authorities?" Marcus asked, and I knew he was thinking about the same thing I had been trying not to think about all morning. Today was also the day that Vivian was scheduled to be released from prison. After serving 4 years of her 7-year sentence, reduced for cooperation and what the parole board had deemed exceptional rehabilitation, my sister was returning to a world that had moved on without her, to a life that would bear no resemblance to the one she had constructed through lies and manipulation. "Nothing official," I said, "but my lawyer mentioned that she's been granted permission to remain in Switzerland for now. Apparently she's been working with a nonprofit that helps museums verify the provenance of suspicious pieces. Volunteer work, part of her rehabilitation program." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. While I had built a career fighting the kind of fraud that Vivian had perpetrated, she was now using her expertise to help undo similar damage. We were working toward the same goals from opposite sides of an ocean, two women who had been shaped by the same destructive dynamic but had chosen radically different paths toward redemption. "Have you thought about reaching out to her?" Marcus asked, and I knew he was thinking about the same thing I had been trying not to think about all morning. "Every day," I said honestly, "but I think we're both healthier when we're not in each other's lives. Dr. Chen says that some relationships are so fundamentally toxic that they can't be repaired, only ended with grace. Maybe loving Vivian means letting her become whoever she's meant to be without my influence." Marcus nodded, understanding the complexity of emotions that still surrounded my relationship with my sister. There was love there, and grief, and a strange kind of pride in what she had apparently accomplished during her incarceration. But there was also wisdom, hard-earned wisdom about the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation, between wishing someone well and actively participating in their life. The morning continued with the familiar rhythms of our shared routine. Marcus left for his office at Blackstone Development, where he was overseeing the construction of a new affordable housing complex in Queens, a project that reflected his own evolution from the purely profit-driven businessman he had been when we first met. I spent the day at the museum, making final adjustments to wall text and lighting, ensuring that every detail of the exhibition reflected the careful research and ethical considerations that had guided its creation. As evening approached and I prepared for the gala, I found myself thinking about the girl I had been 5 years ago, the woman who had stood on the terrace of the Blackstone estate, watching her world crumble while her sister smiled in triumph. That Elena had been defined by her victimhood, shaped by wounds she hadn't fully understood, reactive rather than proactive in her approach to life. The woman who looked back at me from the mirror as I adjusted my dress for the evening was someone entirely different. Not unmarked by trauma, the scars were still there, would always be there, but transformed by the choice to use that pain as fuel for positive change rather than destructive revenge. The gala itself was everything I had hoped it would be and more. The museum's newest galleries were filled with artifacts that had been stolen during various conflicts throughout the 20th century and had now been returned to their countries of origin through the painstaking work of researchers, lawyers, and ethical collectors who had chosen transparency over profit. Each piece told a story not just of artistic beauty, but of cultural healing and international cooperation.
"Elena, darling, you've outdone yourself," said Dr. Margaret Sinclair, the museum's director, as she raised her champagne glass in a toast. "This exhibition isn't just about art, it's about integrity. You've given us a roadmap for how cultural institutions can acknowledge past mistakes and build better practices for the future." As the evening progressed, I found myself in conversations with collectors who wanted to verify the provenance of their own pieces, with museum directors from around the world who were interested in implementing similar transparency initiatives, with journalists who were covering the growing movement toward ethical acquisition in the art world. Each conversation reinforced what I had come to understand about the power of transforming personal pain into purposeful action.
Near the end of the evening, as the crowd began to thin and the waiters started clearing empty glasses from the gallery floors, I stepped outside onto the museum's front steps for a moment of quiet reflection. The city spread out before me, millions of lights twinkling in apartment windows, where millions of people were living their own complex stories of love and loss, triumph and failure, redemption and destruction. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown international number. For a moment, my heart stopped. Could it be Vivian, reaching out on this day of all days? But when I opened the message, it was from someone entirely unexpected. Elena, this is Adrian Whitmore. I hope you don't mind that I tracked down your number through mutual friends. I wanted you to know that I've been following your work with the museum, and I think what you've accomplished is extraordinary. I also wanted to let you know that I'm engaged again, to someone wonderful who I met through volunteer work with refugees. We're both grateful for the second chances that came from difficult circumstances. I hope you're well. Adrian. The message brought tears to my eyes, not from sadness, but from a profound sense of completion. Adrian had found happiness again, had built a relationship founded on service to others rather than social advantage. His life had been disrupted by the revelation of Vivian's true nature, but that disruption had ultimately led him to something more meaningful than what he had lost. As I walked back into the museum to rejoin Marcus and the remaining guests, another message appeared on my phone. This one was from my mother, who had become much more open about emotional expression in the years since our family had begun having honest conversations about our complicated dynamics. "Watched the news coverage of your exhibition opening," she had written. "Your father and I are so proud of the woman you've become. We see how you've transformed pain into purpose, and it gives us hope that healing is always possible, even from the deepest wounds. Love you so much. Mom." The final message of the evening came as Marcus and I were sharing a quiet dinner at our favorite neighborhood restaurant, a small Italian place that had become our tradition for celebrating important milestones. The sender was listed simply as V.A., my sister's initials. I showed the phone to Marcus, my hands trembling slightly as I debated whether to open it. 5 years of carefully maintained separation, 5 years of parallel healing, 5 years of choosing health over the magnetic pull of our destructive dynamic. Did I really want to potentially undo all of that progress with whatever words Vivian had chosen to send? "What does your gut tell you?" Marcus asked gently. I considered the question seriously, checking in with the instincts that had been honed through years of therapy and self-reflection. Surprisingly, I felt no anxiety, no dread, no anticipation of manipulation or renewed attack, just curiosity and perhaps a small amount of hope. I opened the message. "Elena, I saw the coverage of your exhibition opening. I'm proud of what you've built, and I'm grateful that my failures helped to push you towards such meaningful work. I wanted you to know that I've been clean and sober for 3 years, working with a therapist who specializes in personality disorders and volunteering with an organization that helps museums identify stolen art. I'm not the same person who hurt you, though I understand if you never want to verify that personally. I don't expect a response to this message. I just wanted you to know that the sister who is emerging from the ashes of the sister who hurt you is trying every day to become someone worthy of the forgiveness she'll never deserve. Take care of yourself. You're doing important work in the world. Vivian."
The message was everything I could have hoped for, and nothing I had expected. No manipulation, no self-pity, no request for reconciliation or forgiveness. Just acknowledgement, accountability, and respect for the boundaries I had established. It was the message of someone who had done serious work on herself, who understood the difference between making amends and demanding absolution. "How do you feel?" Marcus asked, studying my face as I processed what I had read. "Good," I said, surprised by the truth of it. "I feel complete. Like a chapter that needed ending has finally ended properly." "Are you going to respond?" I considered it for a long moment, then slowly shook my head. "No, but not because I'm angry or because I don't wish her well, because some conversations are perfect in their brevity." Some forgiveness happens not through words, but through the choice to live well, to build something beautiful from the ruins of what was destroyed. As we walked home through the streets of Manhattan, past the late-night restaurants and early morning food trucks, past the homeless shelters and luxury apartments, past all the complex realities of a city that contained multitudes of human experience, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me to this moment. 5 years ago, I had been a woman defined by her wounds, shaped by victimhood, reactive to every attack and insult. The war with Vivian had forced me to discover reserves of strength I hadn't known I possessed, but it had also taught me something even more valuable. The true strength lay not in the ability to destroy one's enemies, but in the ability to transform conflict into growth, pain into purpose, personal healing into service to others. The exhibition that opened tonight would travel to museums around the world, influencing policies and practices that would affect thousands of artifacts and millions of people who deserved to see their cultural heritage treated with respect and dignity. The work I was doing had grown far beyond my original motivation for revenge against my sister. It had become a calling, a way of using my intimate knowledge of art world corruption to create positive change. But perhaps most importantly, I had learned to love and be loved in a way that was healthy, sustainable, and real. Marcus and I had built our relationship on a foundation of honesty about our flaws, acceptance of our limitations, and commitment to growing together rather than trying to fix each other. It wasn't the fairy tale romance I had dreamed of as a young woman, but it was something better. A partnership between two flawed people who had chosen to support each other's growth rather than enable each other's weaknesses. Our apartment felt warm and welcoming as we returned home, filled with books and art and photographs that told the story of the life we had built together. There were pictures from our wedding in Vermont, images from our travels to museums and archaeological sites around the world, candid shots of quiet moments that had accumulated into the texture of a shared existence. As I prepared for bed, removing the elegant dress and jewelry that had marked the public triumph of the evening, I caught sight of myself in the bathroom mirror and paused to really look at the woman reflected there. The face was older, marked by lines around the eyes that spoke of both laughter and tears, both struggle and joy. But there was something in the expression that hadn't been there 5 years ago. A fundamental peace, a sense of being at home in her own skin, comfortable with the choices she had made and the person she had become. "Regrets?" Marcus asked, echoing the question he had posed on our wedding night.
"None," I replied, and this time the answer came without hesitation. No regrets, just gratitude for everything that brought us here, even the painful parts, especially the painful parts. As I settled into bed beside my husband, I thought about the complex legacy of my relationship with Vivian. The pain she had caused me had been real and devastating, but it had also forced me to develop resilience, independence, and ultimately the ability to transform suffering into service. The destruction of our relationship had created space for healthier connections with Marcus, with my parents, with colleagues and friends who valued honesty over politeness, growth over comfort. Somewhere across the ocean, Vivian was beginning her own new chapter, hopefully building a life based on the hard-won wisdom that comes from facing one's deepest failures and choosing to become someone different. I would probably never know the details of that journey, would never witness whether her apparent transformation was genuine or simply another, more sophisticated form of manipulation. But for the first time in my adult life, I didn't need to know. I could wish her well from a distance and trust that the universe would provide whatever consequences or rewards her choices merited. The last thing I saw before sleep claimed me was the city skyline through our bedroom window. Millions of lights representing millions of stories of human resilience and renewal. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to use my position and influence to create positive change in the world. There would be difficult conversations with collectors who didn't want to acknowledge the questionable provenance of their treasures, bureaucratic obstacles to returning artifacts to their countries of origin, critics who preferred the old ways of doing business. But there would also be moments of triumph. Artifacts returned to communities that had mourned their loss for generations, young curators inspired to pursue ethical practices, policies changed to prevent future exploitation. The work I had chosen was difficult and sometimes frustrating, but it was also deeply meaningful, a way of using my personal experience with deception and fraud to protect others from similar exploitation. As consciousness faded into the warm darkness of sleep, I felt profoundly grateful for the unpredictable journey that had brought me to this moment. The war with Vivian had ended not with victory or defeat, but with the recognition that some battles are won not by destroying one's enemy, but by refusing to be destroyed oneself. Some forms of justice come not from punishment, but from the choice to build something beautiful from the ruins of what was lost. The girl who had once defined herself as Vivian's victim was gone, replaced by a woman who understood her own power to shape her destiny, to influence the world around her, to love and be loved with wisdom and intention. That transformation was the real victory, not the destruction of my sister's life, but the construction of my own. In the morning, there would be new artifacts to research, new policies to develop, new ways to use my expertise in service of something larger than myself. There would be quiet dinners with Marcus, honest conversations with my parents, meaningful work that connected my personal healing to broader social change. It was a good life, not perfect, not unmarked by struggle, but authentic and purposeful and whole. It was the life that had emerged from the ashes of everything I thought I wanted, and it was more beautiful than anything I could have imagined when I was still fighting wars that couldn't be won. The war was over. The healing would continue for the rest of my life, and for the first time since childhood, I was genuinely excited to see what came next.